Welcome to another episode Beyond Perception. My name is Simon, and it is my joy to be here today with my guest, Christian Dittrich Opitz. Warm welcome to you, Christian.
Thank you. Great to see you again.
Yeah, I think it's our third or fourth conversation. And for those of our audience who don't know you, just a very brief introduction. I think you intensely or like with great dedication, you studied biophysics, Ayurveda, yoga. You are facilitator of seminars. You're an author of different books in the areas of holistic health and learning. And you're also educating about bioelectric health. So I'm very excited to have another conversation with you. Welcome, Christian. So our topic today is Kundalini or Kundalini energy. And that's a term most probably some, including myself, of us, we have heard and we have some associations, but maybe as an introduction, what is Kundalini energy and how did you get interested in it and started exploring it?
Okay, yes. Well, if you look at spiritual teachings that point to the possibility of enlightenment, which is the realization of one's identity as pure, uncaused consciousness, which is itself of the nature of complete satisfaction, bliss, and which is the reality, the sense of reality we have, which allows us to then take anything for real or to experience anything as real. Why can we do that? It's not intelligence. There used to be this idea in the Western mind that consciousness is somehow a result of the adding up of intelligence. But the computer revolution shows that not to be so, because computers are far more intelligent than humans in so many areas, but they don't know they are intelligent. They do not know of their own existence. We do. And this is described in the Vedas and Advaita Vedanta, and particularly in great detail, and in traditional yoga and in Buddhism and many other of these traditions. This pure consciousness, awareness, existence, awareness, which is also of the nature of total satisfaction, to be what we truly are. And then consciousness has this magical power to project its sense of reality onto all kinds of things which do not inherently have that degree of reality. Now, if we do that, we project, for example, onto our thoughts, onto our opinions, onto our experiences, this sense of reality, well, then we will also project happiness there and demand from the circumstances and fluctuating events of life to give us a permanence of happiness, which is simply not in the nature of the changing experiences of life. So Enlightenment teachings say, you know what? This projection is an unnecessary add-on onto the suchness of life. You can do very well without it. And then instead of projecting reality onto all kinds of experiences, pure consciousness reveals itself. And with that, the realization that happiness is causeless and therefore has no opposite, and it's not the derivative of circumstances. That's not to say that suffering cannot be caused by harsh circumstances, but permanent happiness cannot be caused by even the most favorable circumstances or experiences. So that's all well established in these traditions. Now, there is we could say, idealistic level of looking at this, which says, well, if you're non-dual consciousness, you're not the body, you're not the mind, you're not your thoughts, and any of that. Well, great, that's it. There's nothing more to be said about it. However, realizing this truth also involves a human system. When the Buddha got enlightened 2,500 years ago, I don't think I was, wherever I might have been back then. So even though enlightenment is the realization that you're not a separate individual, there's an individual human being undergoing this process. So it is really a mysterious coming together, the fullest fruition of individual life is to transcend that. That's basically also what Viktor Frankl said, the great Austrian psychologist, survivor of 4 concentration camps, who did such an important work in the field of psychological recovery, who always said that human life finds its meaning in pointing beyond itself. I don't think he had much of a traditional spiritual context for that, but there was a very deep insight in him. So there's this individual human being involved in the process. And within the individual body-mind, there are all kinds of subtle forces that regulate life, the meridians, the various channels of what could be called chi in Chinese medicine, or prana in the yoga or Ayurveda, Sanskrit verbiage. But then there's also one specific energy, and that's called Kundalini. Kundalini literally means coiled, and it's described as coiled up in the perineal area, so what's usually referred to as the root chakra. And Kundalini is different from other types of energy or life force. There are all kinds of healing modalities where people become sensitive to prana, and they can feel the flow or the stuckness and learn to work with that. When Kundalini is aroused from her long sleep, there are overlapping effects, overlapping with other types of energies, such as the release of emotions, physical blockages sometimes, the sense of electricity or tingling and heat and whatnot. But there is also a unique feature that Kundalini has, and that is that as it progresses in its evolution in an individual body, it awakens the power of recognition of the truth of who we are. So power, force, energy, is usually there's this term Shakti in Sanskrit. And there's the Shakti of desire, Icha Shakti, there's the Shakti of action, Kriya Shakti, and then there is Jnana Shakti, and that's the power of recognition. And this is simply our design, that it is within Kundalini that the ability to perceive who we truly are, to realize that conclusively at some point, is dormant and has to awaken for this great realization to occur. So Kundalini awakening is the beginning of the body's energies, and with that the faculties of everything that's connected to the body's energies, including the mind and higher functions of the mind and intuition and so on, where all of this begins to cooperate with the realization of truth. So when for a long time there's this projection from being pure consciousness, we project the sense of reality into all kinds of things that consciousness is aware of. When Kundalini awakens, it becomes realistic. It becomes within the reach of a person to reverse this process, so that at some point, reality just rests in itself. And then we could speak of enlightenment.
And when Kundalini awakens, is this a permanent state, or is it temporary, or is it something which needs to be integrated over a certain time frame, or how does this Kundalini awakening happen?
Well, it depends on what we mean by the word awakening, and something that one of my teachers once said in response to a person was that there's a difference between Kundalini activity and awakening in the real sense of the term means the permanent state, where the central channel that is located within the spine, that is the correct pathway for Kundalini, because Kundalini can be stimulated and go elsewhere also, and we can talk about that a little later. But when that pathway is completely clear and free, well, then Kundalini awakens fully, which means basically you don't have Kundalini anymore because you don't have the coiled up potential anymore. The channel is free, and then the Shakti, the force of consciousness, the power of consciousness in the individual system is simply equal to this Shakti that is everywhere, that's within and outside of any particular form or body. So that would be the permanent state. Now, in the journey of Kundalini awakening, or to full Kundalini awakening, your question, the answer to this question depends on a lot of factors. It is quite possible to have an arousal of Kundalini, have some significant experiences, and then it can go dormant again. For example, if people do not pursue any kind of path, any kind of real interest of deepening this, perhaps even get frightened because it may have the potential to turn one's world upside down, which the enlightenment process will absolutely do. Enlightenment is not you as you know yourself, just better. You as you know yourself will, to a certain extent, cease to exist. And then something far more glorious and satisfying reveals itself as the real you. But it's a process, and it goes through stages. It couldn't happen all at once. The nervous system, energy system could not handle this. So there can be temporary Kundalini activity and then can go dormant, which is why it makes a lot of sense to go through this process with the guidance of people who know it, who have passed through it, and who are therefore competent to guide others.
Thank you very much. And before you mentioned something along the lines of the personal I disappearing, or a detachment, that would be my words, or de-identification from what we think we are. But then, as I understand it, and please correct me if that's right, if that's wrong, then basically a process of waking down, like at first waking up from this individual body-mind, but then it's kind of reintegrating this individual's sense of existence into, like, in this enlightenment process. Is this a correct paraphrasing of bring your individual existence into harmony with this greater understanding or greater existence?
Yeah, I would say there two things are true. One, yes, absolutely. Enlightenment is the end of suffering. It's not the end of the unfolding. And it is paramount to acknowledge that even though there may have been this complete breakthrough where the individual sense of ego, of ahamkara, the I am the doer, is no longer, well, that doesn't mean that you don't have a huge storehouse in your unconsciousness of patterns that do not yet participate in this liberated consciousness. And so the process of shadow integration, shadow in the way that Carl Jung defined this term, this great storehouse of unconscious imprints and patterns and ways of viewing life, interact into it, that is absolutely paramount, because if that is ignored, then what can happen is that people have perhaps a valid level of realization, perhaps become spiritual teachers, and then, well, the freedom of enlightenment can be used as a welcome excuse not to look at these patterns. And so the result is sometimes that there are spiritual teachers running around which are quite confusing, because they can be, in terms of their behavior, really out of integrity. So in the process that I have undergone and I'm participating in, this is definitely acknowledged. Whether you're a siddha, you have accomplished this milestone in this process where you established a non-dual consciousness or not, pre and post awakening, it is crucial to acknowledge the existence of a shadow. And yes, it makes all the sense in the world to harmonize the individual human expression with the enlightened vision. Absolutely. However, something that's also very prevalent today is that largely through the modern neo-Advaitic satsang culture, I would say, a lot of people conflate temporary experiences or even dissociative experiences with enlightenment. Because this very new cultural phenomenon, which only started in the 90s, doesn't really have a substantiated background of a teaching, a tradition, and a profound understanding. It was more or less let loose by, this phenomenon that a lot of people had profound awakenings, particularly through one teacher who must have had an extraordinary power of transmission just through his presence. Many people had these awakening experiences, and I've met over 20 of them with the same teacher and had these honeymoon phases of a few weeks or months, believing they were enlightened, but they were also all told, you're free, you're liberated, there's nothing more to do, go and teach. And then some of them a year later battled depression and suicidal thoughts. And to have a glimpse of enlightenment, well, that can happen quickly, instantly, surprisingly, without any spiritual context sometimes, or in a crisis, or in the presence of someone who's awakened, or whatever. But these glimpses do not necessarily constitute the real thing. And therefore, if there is not someone supervising this process who can perceive if, for example, there is stable Kundalini awakening, which is necessary for transcendence, not just to be an experience, but to be a realization. In other words, to be permanent. Well, then what you have is now in the same satsang culture that used to say there's nothing to do and, just let go of the search and you're free. Now they're saying, that's only for a moment. It's the waking up. Then you have to do all this work. Not that this isn't valid, but first, what is enlightenment should be genuinely clarified. And there are criteria for that are very often forgotten and neglected. And
can you share them?
Well, it is, of course, not something where we can bring in any objective measurement. But if someone has gone through this process and Kundalini is fully awakened, there are certain perceptions that open up where you can perceive in the energy field of a person if there is this kind of density that constitutes a certain level of egoic identity. You can observe people also over time, and it's really an energetic component. It's not something you can quantify objectively. However, if we look at history, we can see that we have teachings available to us that are 1,000 years, 2,000, 3,000 years old. Why is that so? Because they stood the test of time. Strenuous test of time, of course. The reason why it worked was because there was always the principle of be supervised by a teacher. Don't go out and venture out by yourself into the world proclaiming things unless you have valid reason to believe so. And these should be not just your own feelings or ideas. And this principle of a succession of teacher-student stood the test of time. These new phenomena that we have now in the modern spiritual marketplace, well, let's see if they're still around in 500 years. With some of these things, I'm quite doubtful. And so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. This process is valid, it's effective, it has brought people to realization of their true nature for many, many, many generations. And there are aspects to this process and to the realization that, we can speak about, but you have no way of understanding fully upfront what it means. And that's fine. The great American psychologist Abraham Maslow, the founder of transpersonal psychology, conducted a long-term study on World War II veterans. And he wanted to find out which quality allows people to recover from battlefield stress, from battlefield trauma. At the same time, he also conducted a study on developing artists. And the question was, what quality allows artists to fully bring out their creative potential? And after going through a list of all kinds of personal qualities, characteristics, starting with 26, he narrowed it down. And in both these cases, whether it was creative potential or recovering from severe trauma, he found one ability that stood out. Tolerance for ambiguity, as they call it in psychology. But that simply means to make friends with the unknown, And that's a part of this process. Kundalini is an apparently mysterious force. And all these great teachings about the non-dual nature of our being, they sound fine and they may be inspiring and they may resonate with something that people feel deep inside, and perhaps people had glimpses and states that indicate this condition. That's all great. And it's also important to understand that you're entering uncharted territory. The great wisdom teacher Nisargadatta Maharaj, one of the most phenomenal Indian sages of the 20th century, he said, you can only realize the truth when you are astonished. And I, of course, have no factual basis for saying this, but I'm absolutely certain that nobody ever got enlightened and said, well, that's pretty much like I thought it would be. That never happened. I'm very certain of this. Yeah. So it makes sense makes sense to lean on these ancient ways, on these traditions. It is reasonable and even necessary, perhaps, to present them in a modern form. Yes, we have very different cultures and living conditions now than at the times of ancient yogis. That's true. But there's timeless wisdom in these traditions. And as you can probably tell by my talk so far, I'm pretty old school when it comes to that.
And my question here is realization of truth or reality. Is that only possible through Kundalini awakening, or is this one of several possibilities, or how does it relate to also your energetic chakra system?
Well, Kundalini has to be awakened for realization to occur. Now, that doesn't mean that every spiritual path that is legitimate and that may very well lead to enlightenment even mentions Kundalini. So, for example, I know this American spiritual teacher, Adyashanti, who's quite well known these days, and he followed Zen Buddhism. And in Zen, as in Buddhism in general, there isn't much talk about Kundalini, if any at all. But in his mid-20s, he experienced a strong Kundalini awakening. And Ramana Maharshi also said that, of course, he taught self-inquiry, this process of jnana yoga, discernment. Who am I? What is real? What is unreal? And he said that if self-inquiry is practiced seriously, it consolidates a person's energy into the spine, awakens Kundalini. If Kundalini is not aided specifically, it probably takes an enormous purity of focus for it to awaken. So for someone to just use self-inquiry, or for someone to meditate Zen style, and Kundalini is going to awaken through that, as I said, it can happen. It's also rare. Because most people don't have the kind of focus that, for example, someone like Adyashanti had. I mean, he had a certain, he once said his greatest spiritual quality was stubbornness. And he meditated with a kind of dedication that is extremely rare. And some of the disciples of Ramana Maharshi who got enlightened were also probably quite exceptional in the way how they completely, totally, and exclusively focused everything in life on liberation. It is very helpful to aid the arousal and then ultimately the permanent awakening of Kundalini. And for that, of course, there are different ways. There are practices, there are systems of yoga where through pranayama and various techniques, Kundalini is supposed to be aroused. This is a process that may work. However, it does take a long time. And there's one little catch. The illusion that keeps people from realizing who they are is the I am the doer, that sense of I am the doer. Therefore, nothing that people can do by itself can bring about enlightenment, because it doesn't contradict the sense of I am the doer. At the same time, it is the design of Kundalini to bring about the direct realization, I'm not the doer, I'm pure consciousness. What a conundrum.
It's not perhaps understandable, huh? There we venture into the unknown.
Perhaps for that reason, I do not know, but perhaps for that reason, a little over 1,000 years ago, in the remote valleys of Kashmir in India, emerged a new school of thought, a new tradition. It's called Kashmir Shaivism or Shaiva Tantra or Trika Shaivism. Not that well known yet in the West, but it's catching up. And one of the features of Kashmir Shaivism is the practice or process of Kundalini Shaktipat. Shaktipat literally means the descent of Shakti. In very simple terms, it simply means that someone whose Kundalini is fully awakened, who's established in non-dual consciousness, awakens the Kundalini, or stimulates the awakening of Kundalini in others. And the reason why that makes so much sense is we human beings are so highly imitative. We learn so much by osmosis from other people in the first 6 years of our lives. How much do we pick up just by being around people who've mastered basic skills of life? We know how much moods of people influence us. We know how collective fields of people influence us. What's going on in the mind of a person is to some extent contagious. And so it is with awakened consciousness. And in addition to simply the presence of someone who is established in a state of awakened consciousness, Kundalini Shaktipat is then a specific focusing of Shakti from a system that is awakened to another person, to another system. And even on these completely non-verbal, non-objective channels of learning, another human system is simply easier to relate to for our own energy system. Theoretically, we could say, well, pure consciousness is omnipresent. Shakti, the power of pure consciousness, is omnipresent. So just sit and Kundalini awakens. Well, perhaps. Not very likely, though. And this is why Shaktipat coming through a human system is uniquely effective, in my opinion. And so in this path of Kundalini awakening and Siddha Yoga, according to Kashmir Shaivism, the starting point is that someone receives Shaktipat, and not just once. It's very useful to have it repeated for quite some time, regularly. Now that Shakti awakens, the spiritual practice, meditation, is simply to surrender to this process. So it takes some discipline, it takes dedication. If you will, it takes effort, it takes focus, but the focus then yields surrender. So it's the old principle of yin and yang, where in Taoism it is said that at their endpoints they transform into each other. Like very restful sleep will make you very alert in the morning, very yin, very yang. And so the focus, which is we could say, male quality of the mind, to really prioritize finding out who we are, which seems to be rather important. This focus then goes into the total yin of surrender. And surrender with an activated Kundalini is effective, because then meditation is not merely daydreaming along. If that's the case, then meditation techniques are certainly helpful. And some techniques may be employed to be in a more receptive, more alert state. But the bulk of this process is done by simply being totally present with what is happening and allowing Shakti to do her thing. And so this sense of ahamkara, of I am the doer, is not stimulated very much in this process. On the contrary, you are being meditated by this immense power of grace. Ultimately, that power of grace is you as well. But from an individual perspective, at first it feels like, this incredible, way beyond me power that's not now operational. So that is the sadhana, the spiritual practice in this path. And after having been in spirituality for a while and looked into different approaches and studied and practiced some and met a variety of teachers, I would say that if this process is guided appropriately, it is uniquely effective. It makes enlightenment truly realistic for anyone who is serious about it? That's good news.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So, are there requirements to receive Shaktipat?
I would say it is not suitable for people who are mentally so unstable that dealing with the basic necessities of life is too much for them. If people are on strong psychopharmaceuticals, it probably wouldn't work anyway. Other than that, I really wouldn't know of any requirements. It simply takes a clear priority. You know, the word priority comes from Sanskrit, priya, which means that which we most love. When Plato coined the term philosophy, love of truth, he was not referring to thought models imposed over life. For that, he used the term philodoxia, love of opinion. So love of truth, devoting yourself to this not yet quite graspable possibility, but just having the sense that it makes all the sense in the world. I mean, how long do you want to try to improve your life without finding out whose life it is? It takes that. It takes a certain, also perhaps a healthy dose of disillusionment. When you look at the regular, culturally normative pursuits of life and the search for happiness and meaning, and at some point it feels like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, and you don't really find it that useful anymore to
amazing illustration
to put all your hopes into that, which doesn't imply that life isn't absolutely beautiful. Life is also divine. That comes also in this process, that everything is you, everything is divine consciousness, everything is Shiva. Shiva, by the way, is not this blue-skinned yogi that you see on the wall of your favorite Indian restaurant. Shiva literally means auspicious, and it's just another name for divine consciousness. And since I'm at home in this Shaivit tradition, that's a term that is often used there. So if that is there, if it's a clear priority, if it's not a hobby, and if you want a little more from meditation or spirituality than just to be an asset for your regular life, which is fine. If people want to meditate, to have less stress, and that's great. That's a very healthy habit. But if you have this yearning and you feel this itch you can never successfully scratch, and it will only go away when you realize the truth, well, then you're qualified. And basically, if you come across someone who's competent, who offers Shaktipat and the surrounding guidance, well, you're qualified. Life brought you there. Other than that, there shouldn't be too many ideas about what you should be like, to be a proper spiritual aspirant. This will all show itself in the process. Kundalini, when stimulated, will show you your shadow, perhaps in a way like you've never seen it before. There can be quite intense in-your-face experiences. I had a good share of them in my journey. And you will know what there is to change. It will be obvious. And wise teachers may help you with finding out what is to change.
And how is that process looking like? So let's say I have that desire and I want to explore it. So I find a teacher, and instantly they start transmitting, or like the transmission to stimulate my Kundalini energy, or like how does it work? Or are there certain requirements that I first have to do some exercises to get like
donate half your money? Yeah, sure. Well, there may be different organizations that have different policies on that. Now, I'm with an organization that operates under the name of Advaita Ashram. I accidentally found them on the internet a little over 3 years ago. And when people hear the term ashram, they usually think it's a physical place for a community. This is a community spread out all over the world, including the network of teachers. Actually, the word ashram literally means no stress. Shram in Sanskrit means straining, strenuous effort, and a as a prefix is often a negation. So it's non-duality, Advait, without strain. That's the name, the literal translation of that name. Well, so I discovered this group, and a few things stood out as fairly unique. I don't want to say completely unique because I don't know every spiritual organization in the world, but from what I've seen, it's fairly unique. And that is that this organization is not focused on a singular teacher. There is a young man from India, I think I can call him young because I'm so old I could be his dad, who was the first in this, who was the first in this lineage to go through this process, be enlightened. And then he received, you could say, a kind of command from his guru, from his teacher, to share this gift with the world. But what he then did is pretty amazing and makes the whole process for other people very effective. He did not start an organization with himself as the singular teacher. Advait Ashram was from the beginning set up to be a growing team of people who, after stabilizing in this new consciousness, can then in turn guide others, which means there's personal guidance available. Most spiritual teachers, once they become popular, simply cannot offer this. How? A teacher cannot offer personal, individualized guidance to hundreds of thousands of people. It's just not doable. And in Advait Ashram, back when I discovered them, there were 3. Now we're a team of 9. More will be coming because this process is effective. And so in Advait Ashram, what people can do is that they can take a few first introductory sessions. There are one-on-one Zoom sessions available. Yes, Shaktipat works over the internet. I had a hard time believing that before, but what can I say? It is effective. There are also weekly group online meditations. Someone from Advait Ashram is always hosting them, giving Shaktipat during these group sessions. And there are numerous other online and also live events. Traveling teachers of this organization offer retreats in different places. There's Shaktipat for every full moon and on other occasions as well, online or telepathically distant. All this is effective in its own way. But as I said, this personal guidance and the pretty consistent availability of that is fairly unique, because on one hand, there are these generic spiritual wisdom statements, the great sayings of someone like Ramana Maharshi or Nisargadatta and so many others. But then there's also you, the individual human being. There are particular characteristics to your own situation right now, the stage of your journey that you're in, particular challenges and so on. And that's where individualized guidance is very helpful. Another feature of this is if someone who's established in this consciousness focuses their attention on you for an hour, it has a contagious effect. You slowly begin to see yourself more like such a person sees you. Like Ramana Maharshi said, it's contagious. He often spoke of this as if it was some kind of fever or other infection. In this process, as it is offered by this organization, you can receive Shaktipat from the first group or individual session. And if you feel, I want to explore this for real, of course, that has to be there. As much as I can recommend a particular spiritual path, practice, or a set of teachers, there has to be resonance. The best spiritual path is the one you're going to stick with. And if it's something else, go for it. Just go for it all the way. The one thing that is not recommendable is what is very popular today: dip your toes in the water here and there, but never really dive. The old analogy, of course, being that if you have water 10 meters below the ground, you need to dig 10 meters in one place. If you dig 10 holes, 1 meter each, you have the same amount of work, no water. That's very common today, where people are basically information gatherers in the spiritual field. So to follow one path wholeheartedly makes all the sense in the world, and to not mix too much. If the resonance is there, and you would feel that after, I would say, a few sessions, a few meditations with this path, and after a few times of having received Shaktipat. Well, then the process has started, and whatever in this potpourri, in this great buffet of offerings suits your needs, what your schedule allows, what your life situation allows, use it. I shamelessly exploited all these many different opportunities that Advaita Ashram had. I took over 90 one-on-one sessions over 3 years. I did every online event that I had the time for. There are the weekly live satsangs, meditations with Shaktipat. If I didn't have the time to attend them, then there are recordings that you can receive. You can meditate with the recordings. Yes, Shaktipat also worked through a recording, as strange as that may sound. So that worked for me. I saw the wisdom in these teachers. I saw their integrity. I saw a very rare balance, like a seamless continuum of this great non-dual wisdom, that totally transcends every relative point of view, and the power of Shakti, which makes it an alive reality, which makes it tangible, which takes the abstraction out of this great non-dual wisdom, and this remarkable personal integrity where these were very wise and in many ways very remarkable people continue their own personal growth work, and they transport this ancient, time-honored, very important principle of a human teacher without any of the psychological trappings that can also happen in spiritual teacher-student relationships. It's like anything unnecessary is completely absent in this organization, which is why it was very, very easy for me to just trust and to completely commit to this process. So I have to give a lot of credit to these people who, the 3 original founding members were the 3 that guided me personally, mostly in my process, but everyone who came after that also, it's a wonderful group of very dedicated people who will do their absolute best to guide whoever is asking for guidance through this process. And, good teachers want nothing more than for you to realize what they have realized, and to be in this process and to be, let's say, a disciple of this path, or whatever you want to call that. It is important that we take what realized teachers exemplify and embody, an example to emulate. The greatest respect we can offer to a teacher is to assimilate what they're offering and make it our own, rather than admiring enlightenment from a distance. That's what is very common, and it's very easy to do. It costs you nothing. You can say, oh, the great sages, the great Ramana Maharshi, the great this. But they don't want to be called great. They want you to realize greatness is the only thing there is. There's only Shiva. There's only divine consciousness. You are that every bit as much as the greatest sage who ever lived. I have to say, from everything I've seen, this organization at Advaita Ashram offers that in a unique purity and in a very intelligent and comprehensive way. So to answer your question, how does the process work in a concrete manner? Go to the website, look what's available. You can book a session. You can sign up for the link that will enable you to participate in these weekly meditations. And I would strongly recommend to also get some individual sessions to get a feeling for the process, to get a feeling for this energy field, to get a feeling what it's like to have the guidance of those who offer it. And then after some time, you will know, is this for me or not? And then everything else will follow very smoothly and naturally. It's pretty amazing that without neglecting our obligations in life and other things, and without forgetting to enjoy life, still, if this priority is real, that knowing the truth of existence is kind of the most important thing going on here. then everything in life will cooperate with your process. And that's the beauty of it. You don't have to figure it out. It's not a strategy. No, it's not the work of our inner bookkeeper. That's good for taxes and stuff. The journey of realizing what is real will be aided by the fact that you are real. The power of grace is innate. It's within you, just waiting for your cooperation.
Ananda Mahima, the Indian saint, had this quote, "Who am I? This realization is the purpose of human life."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, people can choose any variety of purposes, of course. One thing that is remarkable about all the traditional documentation about enlightenment is absolutely no one, not a single person, has ever been recorded to regret it. Show me another human endeavor where that is true. People may say, I want a family, I want this career, that career, this accomplishment. Well, for all of that, you can find people who have that and are happy about it, and others who are, well, oh, it's okay, and others who are absolutely miserable about it. That is one of the fascinating things in seeking happiness through experiences that we know from experience already may make us happy for a while, but the same thing can also make us miserable or simply become neutral. We know that. It's quite obvious if we investigate our experience, yet repeatedly trying to find the thing that will be different, where it's completely all satisfying and permanent. That's not going to happen.
So I do have another question. So from anecdotal stories, there are reports about Kundalini awakening going wrong. And from a personal experience, I don't know when that was, maybe 7-8 years ago, I participated in some kind of Kundalini practice, and there was a Shaktipat transmission, which I'm sure it was not the most integer organization, but it led to very weird experiences, and I had to I stopped that relationship. And
Yes.
maybe you can talk a little bit about what can go or what could go wrong, and what's important to have as a foundation or basis or guidance.
Well, Kundalini these days has become some kind of umbrella term under which you find all kinds of things that really have little to do with Kundalini. Very strong stimulation of prana isn't the same as Kundalini awakening. I was quite skilled in the use of prana years ago, but when I received Shaktipat, it was obvious that there's this distinct difference, because Shaktipat is really non-dual consciousness extending itself into prana. And if someone is not established in non-dual consciousness, they may be magicians in the use of prana, but that's not Kundalini.
So there's also differentiation between having siddhas, I think that's the term, no? Like
Siddhis,
magical or cities, magical capacities, and being kind of like also maybe not having a really stable understanding of your own egoic structure, and then using that
cities are somewhat like if you drive your car to a destination, the engine will make a sound. The sound is not the destination, and it's also not what propels the car. It's simply a byproduct. So paying too much attention to it and thinking it's the destination is not going to help you with your ride. So I would completely forget about cities. If they come, they come. If you're meant to have them, you'll have them. But it's not a subject worthy of any focus.
That's probably from listening to that would be a very important distinction by choosing your teacher to have this understanding, I guess.
Yeah, and if people develop cities through this process, any teacher worth his salt will not talk about them or show them, period. That I'm absolutely clear about that. If people show off cities, then chances are they're trapped in a spiritually disguised form of ego. Now, as far as Kundalini is concerned, or strong pranic arousals, there is a hierarchy of channels, energy channels. And there's what's called the central channel in the spine, Sushumna. And within it, there are three more distinctions. You could say concentric circles only moving, imploding rather than expanding. And the innermost, the Brahmanadi, the flow of Brahman, the pure being, when that is awakened, Kundalini fully awakens. When that is clear, Kundalini is free all the way up to the top to Brahmanindra, then Kundalini is fully awakened. Someone may be able to stimulate prana through forced practices and through some kind of energy transmission. And then it goes into whatever channels, like in the front channel, that actually is supposed to be a downward flow in the front center line of the body. Renmai channel in Taoism, Sarasvati channel in the yogic language. If Kundalini is stimulated to move up there, then you have what's now present on the internet, where people say, this is Kundalini, and then the person always has the same effect. It's these waves through the body that look very orgastic, and that may be a fun experience, but it's not the proper channel for Kundalini. It will never go beyond here, because it's not designed to go up here. So the higher centers of perception, Jnana Shakti, will not awaken. But it's conflated with Kundalini. And then it's called Kundalini this, Kundalini that process. And yeah, sometimes there are people who are quite capable of stimulating prana and maybe want to demonstrate how strongly they can stimulate prana, and then weird experiences are possible. But a genuine Kundalini process is different. If someone is capable of giving actual Shaktipat, there's a sensitivity to the individual person. There's a possibility of tailoring Shaktipat in such a way that it's less stimulating and more calming. There's a stimulating form of Shaktipat.
Who would tailor that? Is it me tailoring it, or the teacher?
Well, depending what your current situation is. Let's say you are overwhelmed by strong Kundalini arousal. Well, then there are ways to calm that down. And there are ways to calm that down that you can do. There are certain grounding practices and such, but there's also a way of working with Shakti from the end of someone who's giving Shaktipat, where it's not always about the most intense stimulation. That has its place, absolutely. So for example, at retreats with Advaita Ashram that I visited in this process, Rohan Kapoor, that's the name of the young man from India who began this lineage of Advaita Ashram. He would say that in the morning sessions, we would have Shaktipat Inferno, and that's the strong stimulating version. And then later in the day, there would be more of a process of consciousness resonance, less energetic, which is very calming, which is really settling things down. The other things that can go wrong with Kundalini is sometimes people have spontaneous awakenings and they don't know what hit them because they don't have any spiritual training, particularly in a Western context. People are often pathologized if they speak about these phenomena. There's no understanding as of this time in our culture about Kundalini. And of course, that can lead to serious self-doubts and fear, understandably, if there was just a spontaneous awakening. I've known quite a few people who had spontaneous awakenings, were in some kind of crisis, and what helped them was Shaktipat, because it helped the energy to find the right channel and to become a constructive process of liberation. Something that can go wrong is if people have an awakened Kundalini or stimulated Kundalini and they either do too much forced practices, they're forceful energy or breathing practices, like very long breath holds and things like that. That can overstimulate the system. And also very intense use of certain substances. That's not to say that psychedelics cannot help to open doors to perception. But for example, what I see these days, people doing ayahuasca once a week for like 6 months on end.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not what the shamans in the Amazonian rainforest would do. Mm-hmm. And it's simply an extreme stimulation of certain receptors in the brain. At some point, they're just burned out. Couple that with an activated Kundalini, that may not be such a good idea. So there doesn't have to be some kind of perfection of purity, but a solid, healthy lifestyle certainly helps. And then it's a matter of finding teachers with integrity and teachers where there is not this fascination with the most spectacular experience, because enlightenment is not a crescendo of ever increasing dramatic experiences. It's realizing there's no one there having experiences, and then realizing, your consciousness, your bliss, your everything. You don't need a particular experience to have that confirmed. And strong energetic experiences often happen when Kundalini runs against blockages. So that when there's all the fireworks and a lot of spontaneous movements, that's normal. That's the physiological part of cleansing of Kundalini. But these are phases, and they're supposed to end at some point. You don't want to have Kundalini stimulation and just shake for the next 30 years. That's not the point. The point is, who are you? If there are blockages in the body that need to be released for that realization to occur, well, then they will be released. But these are stages, and the experiential content, well, that's not the main dish. It's just on the side. So when there's too much focus on that, when people try to recreate strong, stimulating experiences, and when there are teachers who perhaps find some kind of satisfaction in stimulating these, unbelievably strong experiences in people, that, things can go slightly wrong. Although many years ago, I had a discussion with Dr. Gabriel Cousins, an American doctor who is a psychiatrist and a Kundalini Shaktipat yogi. He lived with Swami Muktananda, who was a famous Shaktipat guru in the 70s. And he said, even though he founded a Kundalini crisis network for people with Kundalini crisis, he said, Kundalini crisis is quite rare compared to what he saw, thousands of people in Muktananda's ashram receiving Shaktipat. And a few had problems, yes. And he also kind of debunked the myth that's sometimes out there that half of the people living in psychiatric hospitals actually have Kundalini awakening. Gabriel Cousins is a psychiatrist. He worked in psychiatric hospitals and said, no, that is not the case. Psychosis is different from Kundalini crisis.
That's a story I've heard also, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean,
but I think...
And the difference is that strong Kundalini awakening, if it's a little overwhelming, there can be physical symptoms. And, it can be difficult sometimes, but you do not have in these people a fundamental loss of the perception of ordinary reality. Just because people are in Kundalini crisis, they do not believe things that don't exist. They don't develop paranoia, they don't develop imaginary friends, or they don't think the wall is talking to them, like in some forms of schizophrenia. Now, psychosis is different from Kundalini crisis. Kundalini crisis can be difficult to deal with. But then again, a competent guide who knows the process is probably the best for such people. And I've seen that. I've seen that in Advaita Ashram. I've seen my own teachers help people in such situations. And I can certainly attest to the fact that if this process is stimulated and guided wisely, it is absolutely benevolent beyond belief. I mean, it's the force that brings you home only to realize you never left, and it's the end of suffering. Compared, I would say, to the dangers for one's psychological health that ordinary life has today, where 1 out of 8 people in Germany at some point in their lives take psychopharmaceutical medications for extended periods. Psychological disorders are the main reason today in Western countries for early retirement, that's scary. And that's ordinary life in societies that haven't experienced war in a long time and where things are relatively good, or so one might think. So what's dangerous here? I'm not belittling the fact that some people have Kundalini issues, Kundalini crisis. I'm just saying there are solutions for that. Even though it can be highly unpleasant, it's not the same as severe mental illness, which can be deadly. In many cases, it is.
Makes a lot of sense, and also what you just shared. And that's one of my own realizations, is that there's a difference, an important difference in seeking a certain experience or seeking reality or truth as free of attachment to a certain experience.
Experiences are great if people have experiences, because that's normal along the path. You're not going from totally stuck in ego to totally enlightened. You will have experiences of oneness, of maybe emptiness at times, no self. That's a typical stage. That was there for a while for me in this process. The real value of such experiences, if you look at what are they telling you about the nature of reality. So even if the experiential intensity weans off, which is natural, something remains. You are informed now by what this experience has revealed. And in this way, experiences become useful. And then it's easy to not be attached to their peak because you've taken something from them that lasts beyond the peak. So that would be one way of utilizing spiritual experiences. And of course, as you said, wanting the same experience or the same peak and so on, well, yeah, that's our imaginary process. And imagination is not what we need in a process of discovering that which is not imaginary. So much of life is imaginary, even perception. I mean, even ordinary perception. We think the sky is blue. No, it's not. It doesn't have a color. There's a physical effect called the Rayleigh scattering, which was discovered by this British physicist in 1884. And it's simply that because the molecules are very small, colorless light is not reflected like from white surfaces. It's reflected in a scattered way. And depending on the angle we're looking at, during the day it's blue, in the evening it's red. I have a beautiful sunset over there right now. It's neither red nor blue. So we cannot even rely completely on ordinary perception. We just project, blue is up there. No, it's not. It's behind our eyes. And it's because of a physical effect that makes the true nature of things up there invisible to us. Therefore, using too much imagination and too many ideas about what should and should not happen in this process is simply not helpful. It may be happening because of momentum. We go about life like this a lot, right? So it may not completely stop immediately, but it's just helpful to not take one's imaginations about spirituality and enlightenment and experiencing them too seriously. If you can have a good laugh about it, it's all fine.
Maybe as a last question, so then is the one giving Shaktipat, is he or she then kind of confirming back to you that now like your Kundalini is kind of well grounded, awakened, or like is there a final assessment in that sense, or how does it work?
Well,
or is it for yourself?
Probably both to some extent, but it is so natural. If you find this process useful, if you have the resonance, you say, okay, I want to really explore this seriously. Kundalini is awakening, period. That's what Shaktipat does. I cannot fathom an unawakenable Kundalini. That would necessitate some kind of extreme condition in the body-mind, which would probably, in all likelihood, mean the person wouldn't be seeking a spiritual practice. They would have other kinds of problems.
Can I ask here? So what you're saying is it's a possibility for each one of us within a lifetime to open up that experience.
Yes, absolutely.
That realization.
Absolutely. And, for me, when I began this process, well, almost 3.5 years ago, I was the last one to expect that it would work for me or work for me within a relatively short time. I was convinced I'm a very tough nut to crack. I don't have a particularly, let's say, healthy psychological foundation due to my early life. Life was what it was. And pretty strong self-doubts were part of my makeup. And particularly because these teachers that I met there were so genuine in their loving kindness and in their empowering support. It was so authentic that in the light of this clarity, hey, of course, this is for you. Of course, you can find the truth. All my doubts came up. No? Because here was the total contrast to that, to the doubts that I had. And that's also the nature of the process. In the light of awakened consciousness and true grace, everything that's not aligned with that will show up, which is beautiful. I mean, it's painful at times, but it's beautiful because what you can see is what you can start to be free from. Maybe not overnight, but it will happen. And so I didn't start this journey with any kind of confidence. I just had a certain stubborn persistence. It didn't matter that I had these doubts. It was completely unimportant. Because although I had them, I stopped worshiping the narrative they were telling. I saw, okay, I have these feelings and they'll be there until they're not. But what if what my teachers are telling me is true? I was more interested in finding that out. If only to prove them wrong, but I had one of these sinister devils in me also at one point. But yeah, that's what science is for, right? Science is not to prove things, it's to disprove things. That's what it can do much better. That's the original definition of the scientific process. And so I simply persisted with it, but I would say my process was quite ordinary. It was, in terms of spiritual experiences, not particularly spectacular, not at all. After about 1.5 years, there were these beginning experiences of no self, of nothingness, of sobering from the addiction to life, basically. But in the end, it worked beautifully, and that is the power of awakened Shakti. That's the power of grace. That is within our design. It is not added to the system. It's not an acquired skill or quality. It is innate, and it only has to be revealed, and some layers that seem to cover it have to be removed, which is what this process is doing. So yes, this is absolutely for everybody. If it worked for me, I don't think anybody has a good excuse. Because I never considered myself, particularly gifted in this field of spirituality. There are other people who have much easier access to whatever mystical experiences and whatnot. It is absolutely for everybody who finds it important enough.
Thank you, Christian, for this very insightful conversation and sharing from your experience, and that's very much appreciated. So we can share the websites to Advait Ashram and also your personal website, so that everybody who's curious and interested to learn more and explore that can do so.
Yeah, there's the advaitashram.org website, which I think we should post the link, and there are also a few Facebook sites that would be useful for people to have if they want to explore this. Definitely. I mean, this is for participation. Discussions are fine, but they're only an entrance point, and this is about finding your essential being. That's unhinged happiness and freedom. Go for it.
That's a wonderful invitation. Yeah, let's take you up on that. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Christian. Is there something else you think is missing? I have a sense it was a very beautiful round conversation and introduction.
Yeah, maybe I would like to add one more thing, and that's largely due to the culture of the times we live in. What the collective does influences us, often more than we would like to acknowledge, because of course we would all like to be really, independent thinkers and so on, but we're not. There are enough solid scientific studies and social sciences and so on. We're open systems mentally, and we're influenced. And so one of the trends that you see, I already mentioned this one, dipping your toe in the water in all kinds of places, but never diving really deep, simply because there's so much information available, and every week you can find something new that sounds interesting. But at some point, if it's about spirituality, that's not gathering more and more information. You really have to go deep in one path, one process. And the other thing is that, I mentioned the importance of teachers and the guru principle. Guru, the word literally means gravity. It's what draws you to your true being. So it's a principle. And of course, it is within you, but it also makes every sense in the world to have the guidance of a friendly, competent teacher in this process. And I'm saying this because in this day and age, it is so popular that everyone wants to be their own master, which may mean that you have a confused master for a pretty long time. There's nothing genuinely independent about being governed by one's own mental conditioning, thoughts, feelings, opinions, and so on. That's not independence. That's simply being governed by these patterns, which in turn are influenced today very often by algorithms. So how much time do you spend in social media, on what channels, and connect with what kind of people? That's what influences people's worlds. And that's just in the nature of the mind. So true independence is something that is also innate. One of the features of this consciousness that we are, in Kashmir Shaivism, it's called Svatantriya, which means absolute independence. That's already always the case. We don't have to affirm it on a level of existence where it doesn't happen. As human beings, we're not independent for a second. You think the two of us decided to have this conversation? Well, what about the people in the electrical power plants who supply the electricity for what we're doing right now? We didn't build the computers we're using. And if farmers had stopped growing food for us a year ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We would grow food. So we don't do anything independent. And that's fine. That's the nature of life. Life works as a whole. There are no isolated pockets of life somewhere. No. So, of course, you have to choose teachers wisely. And there are some who have a desire for power, and that's not good. That can be very detrimental psychologically and spiritually, frankly, for people who are genuine seekers. And sometimes people with a desire for power attract people who have high ideals in their hearts, because they tend to be quite willing to undergo a lot in the pursuit of their ideals. So to choose teachers wisely, check if their message and how they behave, if that matches. I would always recommend that. Chances are that if you do that with the teachers I mentioned, with this group in Advaita Ashram, you will find that that's a pretty good match of conduct and message. And when that is given, when that is there, it is very useful to have this friendliness of someone who wishes nothing for you but your own ultimate good, coupled with the power to actually facilitate that. And we have lost sight of that in a culture that is so much concerned with polishing one's image. And polishing one's image has so much to do with, I'm my own thing, I'm my own creature, I'm my own this and that. There's very little lasting satisfaction in that. And the acknowledgement, when I met my teachers, I put aside everything I knew, whatever I'd learned, spiritually or otherwise. I said, okay, I don't know anything. That was really helpful. Because what did I really give up? A little pride? My goodness, that's so lame. Been there, done that. That's not worth anything. And to acknowledge that someone is wiser than me, if that's actually the case, that's good, because then I can learn. If I try to defend my, well, it's okay, you have your wisdom, I have mine, what can I learn? Then I become a prisoner, the horizon of how far I can see. I don't want to be imprisoned by that. So now this shift of consciousness has happened. I keep learning. I keep receiving guidance from my teachers. I don't want to be stuck anywhere. We can realize the truth of who we are, and at some point, there's something permanent about it. But while as pure consciousness, there are no levels. There's one without a second. It also involves this human form, and the human form takes time to get used to eternity. There are deepening levels of this realization to unfold, otherwise the system wouldn't be functional. There's this process of shadow integration. Free from suffering, yes. Already established in bliss, yes. But as a human being, I'll be a lifelong disciple. I'll be a lifelong learner. For the rest of my life, I will regard my teachers as great friends, yes, and also as my teachers. And that's very empowering. Self-empowerment happens when you strengthen that which is truly powerful. When you try to pimp up something that's not that powerful by design. And I hope this can perhaps help if people are somewhat skeptical about this institution of teacher-student in a spiritual context. I understand the skepticism. I've seen some bad examples. I've known students of teachers who probably should not have been teachers. So I understand the skepticism, but the real jewel of the Guru principle is unbelievably, that I think was what I still wanted to say.
Awesome, yeah. Well, Christian, thank you so much, for taking the time, being here, sharing your wisdom with us. And as said before, for everybody who is listening and watching, you will find more information below in the description to this podcast. That said, I wish you well. Keep exploring, and big hug, and see you next time. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.